The billionaire supermarket entrepreneur, John Catsimatidis, has forecast that food costs will rise by 10% within the following 2 months. Catsimatidis, the owner and president of the Gristede grocery chain in New York City, told Fox's Mornings with Maria that food prices were going up faster than anybody expected. "I see over 10% in the next 60 days, he stated, according to a Fox Business report. He didn't say how much will be passed on to customers, but he did say he was concerned that they were paying more. According to Catsimatidis, inflation is genuine tax on the poor and a tax on the middle class because when companies are taxed and pass it on to consumers, guess what happens? They intend to boost the pricing. They'll either raise their rates or go bankrupt. So the tough question to ask, what now? How can the world act together to deal with the upcoming global food insecurity and avoid further food disaster? What's the situation now? The prolonged conflict in Ukraine, as well as the resultant disruption in food, fuel, and fertilizer markets, has worsened an already existing food crisis brought on by violence, climate shocks, COVID-19, and economic constraints, and especially in circumstances now facing the humanitarian problems. To bring families back from the verge of famine, build sustainable food systems, and avoid any subsequent food crises, holistic answers that target the multiple causes and consequences of food insecurity are needed. A few weeks ago, world leaders focused on the global hunger issue at 2 crucial meetings hosted by the United States, a ministerial-level discussion on May 18 and an Open Security Council forum on May 19. The primary goal of these conferences is to stimulate action on global food security and resilience, with an emphasis on the essential linkages between warfare and hunger, especially the effects of Ukraine's war. During 2022, the world is not expected to be immune to food shortages. A contemporary academic research looked at how the pandemic impacted people's willingness to work in the meatpacking industry. It discovered that there was a labor deficit in the industry before the epidemic. COVID-19, on the other hand, worsened it, especially as wages were ill during outbreaks. The consequences had a detrimental influence on the types of meat available as well as the total quantity. Lemon prices have risen in India. In Nigeria, jollof rice has gotten so pricey that many are missing meals. Avocado prices in Mexico have risen, making them a privilege few can purchase. Florida's orange orchards are producing the least quantity of fruit in years. In Japan, a salmon scarcity is affecting the sushi industry. Over the last few years, global food security has gradually deteriorated. According to the 2022 Global Report on Food Crises, approximately 193 million people faced crisis-level or severe food insecurity in 2021, an increase of about 40 million from the last year's record of 189 million. The bad food security picture is expected to persist or deteriorate this year, and the implications of the Ukrainian crisis on global food chains will indeed add to even further collapse. Effect of food insecurity on marginalized categories. The worldwide hunger issue is felt most acutely by the most disadvantaged and marginalized individuals, who have poor ability to embrace new shocks. This seems to include women and girls who, despite their critical involvement in food production and preparation, quite often eat last and least throughout times of heightened food insecurity, and more vulnerable to gender-based violence and various other forms of exploitation and abuse, and are frequently omitted from discussions about how to address food insecurity. Food insecurity and malnutrition also have a horrific effect on children, subjecting them to direct and long-term cognitive and physical consequences, undermining their immune systems, and likely to lead to hurtful household coping mechanisms such as child labor, child withdrawal from school, and gender-based violence, such as child marriage and other types of violence. Acting together. It is a normal human and political instinct to turn inward when confronted with a situation that seems to be over our grasp. Food shortages, inflation, the recurrence of COVID-19, and the repercussions of global warming are all affecting the globe at the same time. Considered collectively, they pose a danger to the global stability and wealth. This danger might expedite the withdrawal of several countries from globalization and international cooperation. This is the incorrect conclusion. Climate change, and now the threat of worldwide food catastrophe, demonstrates unequivocally that the world's problems and solutions are inextricably intertwined. The unified response to Russia's assault demonstrated the strength of collaboration. More, not less, cooperation is essential to negotiate a route forward throughout subsequent crises. That is valid especially for inflation, a serious issue that people in many other nations want their governments to address. Inflation is greater than it has been since the early 1980s, which means that far too many individuals can't keep up with purchasing the very same products and services. Republicans have pushed to accuse the federal government for increased costs, blaming it for overstimulating the domestic economy with rescue funding in reaction to the outbreak, and economists widely believe this was a contributing factor. Rising inflation in other developed countries emphasizes that price rises are a worldwide phenomena, exacerbated in part by global interruptions in the flow of oil, food, and other items. While the Fed tightens demand, the Biden administration may alleviate economic hardship by trying to increase the availability of products and services. The United States can assist itself and the rest of the globe by collaborating with other countries, particularly those in Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia that are most vulnerable, to handle a severe approaching food crisis. Shortages are indeed severe in areas of Africa, and several of the causes are commonly understood. Harsh weather caused by climate change, the economic horrors of COVID-19, and resource inequality. However, Russia's attack on Ukraine has created a new and catastrophic dilemma. Ukraine is the world's fourth largest exporter of grain and seeds, primarily corn and wheat, but its capacity to convey food has been severely hampered by Russia's occupation or blockade of its ports. It's critical to get Ukrainian grain flowing. Much of it is often sent to underdeveloped nations experiencing severe food shortages. The Ukrainian silos must be emptied to make place for grain that is about to be harvested. Global humanitarian aid. Global humanitarian financing is vital to preventing and responding to food insecurity, and the international community must perceive this as a turning point to salvage the situation. Nevertheless, immediate assistance alone will not suffice to relieve this catastrophe. Donors must improve their ability to leverage long-term financing methods in order to stay ahead of the growing global hunger levels and create resilience. States must also cooperate in coordinated diplomacy and collaboration to advance rights-based trade, economic, climate, food system, and social protection strategies, while avoiding protectionist trade measures that risk to throw millions of additional people into serious food insecurity. To that end, states, donors, multilateral organizations, and other stakeholders working to solve global food security, particularly conflict-induced famine, may consider the next specific steps. To begin, emphasize inclusive diplomacy in order to address the core causes of food insecurity and to promote legislative measures that safeguard poor and marginalize everyone's access to nutrition and livelihoods. This involves maintaining access points and trade flows, reducing balance of payment pressures, investing in social security and safety nets, and boosting domestic food production and fair land distribution that encourage small-scale producers, particularly women. It also necessitates preserving the safety of civilian and civilian objects during conflict, as well as tackling the consequences of climate change on food security by acting on Paris Agreement promises to fund climate action and operationalizing the Santiago Network. Second, safeguard and enhance resources to address the acute, medium, and long-term consequences of the food security problem. Donors must enhance funding to global humanitarian requests and avoid transferring aid from pre-existing crises to adapt to fresh catastrophes, such as the Ukraine crisis and domestic refugee responses. Assistance should be directed toward local groups, especially women-led organizations that are currently addressing hunger in their areas. Donors should also increase reliable multi-year support for humanitarian, development, and peace-building projects to promote resilience, while also ensuring that funding and programs are coherent, integrated, and gender transformational. Third, customize food aid approaches to each setting, incorporating cash, vouchers, in-kind food aid, and livelihood and agricultural help. Whereas the primary purpose of aid is to rescue lives as soon as possible, throughout assessment of relief mechanisms can support in improving resilience to global market shocks. Donors should understand that cash and vouchers may touch starving individuals in crises faster than commodities assistance. Massive support for small-scale farmers and sustainable agricultural practices, including agroecology and renewable energy for agricultural production, is essential for improving livelihoods and assisting farmers in dealing with soaring fuel rates and decreased access to fertilizers as well as other materials.